thank you guys so much again for the film, for sharing the film with us here. As I mentioned, it's the first time in the US, so super proud that we were able to include it in this year's lineup, and it's an incredible story. And I just wondered, Ellen and Kate and Liz, how did you come to this story? What was it about Lee Miller's story, each of you, that made you want to tell it and that made you pursue telling it? Because I know it was a long gestation period for this.
Am I on? Is this on? We'll just trade. Okay, cool. Hi. I think you and I came to it kind of similar time, actually. So Kate Winslet reached out, which is the most insane thing that I'm saying. Super casual. She reached out and told me she had this movie that she'd been trying to make. We had talked a little bit about a different movie before that. She told me she'd been trying to make this movie for years, and she told me that Ellen Kuras was going to direct it, and I was like, I'm going to drop everything. I don't know what the movie is. Sure, that sounds great. But what really made me lean in, and I think you and I had a breakfast really soon after this, which kind of solidified it, was we didn't want to make an easy movie. And it was something that Kate Winslet had sort of, when she talked to at least me, and I think both of us about this at the very beginning, was like, Lee is hard. Lee is not the woman that we're all used to seeing biopics made about. She was rough around the edges. She was difficult. Antony, chime in, whenever. But she...
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
She had an integrity and a fire that was very unique. And there was something very amazing about wanting to make a movie that wasn't going to be easy, that was wanting to make a movie about somebody who was really led by integrity and led by ambition. And Ellen and I had breakfast not soon after that, and Ellen told me about her vision for the film and how none of it would be easy, which sounds like the reason to run, but actually, in truth, was absolutely the reason to dig in. And nothing about this movie has been easy since. But it was really making something about a woman, truthfully, shouldn't be easy, because we are complicated and we are difficult. Not me, but others. And we shouldn't all be uniform on screen. And so making something that wanted to show a true human being who happened to be a woman was very inspiring.
Many, many years ago, when I first started in photography, I looked at a lot of photographers, and of course, Lee Miller was one of those photographers, because there weren't that many women who would go out in middle age and thrust themselves in the middle of the war. But also I was really interested in the interwar period when she was actively working as a surrealist. And so I was really interested in her work at that time, the fact that she went to Man Ray and said, I want to learn photography, because she had been very, very well known as a model before that and worked with the premier photographers of the day. And she decided that she wanted to take control of her image and not be objectified and step behind the camera. So I found that fascinating. I was like, who is this person at that time to do this, in the 30s, when women didn't really have they didn't have the power. They were expected to be at home. And so I was really interested by this person, and that's why, when I read Tony's book about Lee. Tony has written many books about his mother and really brilliantly, laid out, her trajectory, as an artist and as someone who went out there to seek for the truth. And that I found really compelling. Someone who goes to seek the truth and to see what's happening behind the scenes. And for me, Lee was someone who didn't look at, the bloody parts of the war. She was looking at what happened to the people who were affected by the war. And for someone, I thought that was a really interesting shift of point of view. So when Kate then discovered Lee through buying this table. She bought a table that belonged to Lee back in, I guess, 2013, right, Tony? Because she has a house in Cornwall, and she bought this table. She called me up and she said, "Elle, I bought this table. It was owned by Lee Miller." And we both marveled about who would have sat at that table. As you can see, she had friends, Man Ray, Paul Eluard, the famous poet. Picasso was one of her closest friends. And she said, "I don't know why a film has never been made about Lee Miller." And that's when this whole project began, was when she started investigating about, why wasn't there a film? And that's when she went to Tony and said, "I want to make a film about Lee Miller." And you can take it from there, Antony Penrose.
Well, in fact, there was a film in progress at that time because Troy Lum of Hopscotch had the rights. And Kate then approached Troy at actually the Toronto Film Festival. And the next thing I knew was that Troy was telling me that Kate was going to be Lee Miller. And that was the best news I could have ever had, because 30 years before, when I had seen Titanic and I'd seen Kate in that, I said to my wife at that time, Rosalind, I said, "Gosh, if ever anybody made a movie about Lee, I would really so love to have Kate as Lee Miller." And so my dream has come true, and it's taken, 30 years of dreaming and 8 years of very intense work by Kate, because things really started to happen when she came on the production, that's for sure.
But the difference is that Kate wanted to change the point of view, because there had been other people who had come to Tony who wanted to make a film. But they always wanted to show Lee, in the aftermath. They wanted to show her, as someone who was ravaged by the war, and it was really a different point of view about showing, what was it that the spirit of this person who went out there, and to show the damage, the risks that she took. I mean, she risked everything, at great expense of her own self to tell this story. And you can see it on the screen. When she went to Dachau, she was someone who didn't just photograph it from afar. She gets into the car with the bodies to actually be amongst them to tell the story and to tell from the other side. And so I found that particularly compelling. It's like, how can we tell this from a subjective point of view? So much of how we designed the film, and in talking with Pavel Edelman, was about that. It's like being with her, breathing with her. So in the beginning of the film, when we are running through the war, we run through that battlefield, we deliberately changed the sound design to bring the breathing forward, so we feel like we're with her rather than looking at her. And that was one of the things I kept on saying. I don't want to look at her. I want to be with her. I want her to take us through this.
There's just so much passion I can hear from all of you around this project, and I love it. And it's, as I mentioned, I think it was a long process getting it to the screen. And Kate, I wondered if you could talk about your work with Kate Winslet. Obviously, you've worked together many times, and how you worked as a team to make this happen, kind of logistically.
I think there's two women really that got this made, Kate Winslet and Lee Miller. We all wanted, Lee had kind of, for everything she's done, she's not recognised in history in the way that she should be, despite Antony's huge efforts. And I think that the passion of getting her the place that she deserves, and Kate's drive. Kate's obviously super talented, but she's also one of the most hardworking people I've ever met. We lived together through the whole shoot in Croatia, in Budapest, and she would be up at 5, into the makeup, doing, then she'd shoot all day. There was 2 afternoons when she wasn't on in 9 weeks. And then she was with me behind the scenes. We would, and in between takes, we would be talking about how we structure the next part. What are we doing the next day? And then we would get home at night and we'd go through the scenes for the next day. And we often shot 6-day weeks, didn't we? And then on the days off, we would have the actors to the apartment and we would go through all the scenes. We'd make sure that we had it right. And then after we made little changes based on, things that had happened before, she would then go, upstairs with her dialect coach, who was also living with us. It was like communal living, and go through all those lines, and then get up again at 5 and do it. And she just drove it. And you need someone like that who just embraces everyone. And I think the logistics of putting together, the money and then the team, and we had this brilliant passion from everyone, and people really just came to it. And I think she brought us all together, didn't she? I mean, it was like that's the kind of linchpin, was having her knowing what she wanted to do. And she kind of held the film in her head and drove it for 9 years. And here we are.
Here we are. Thank you, Kate. Okay. And other Kate.
Yeah.
Thank you, both Kates. I wondered, Liz, this is an adaptation of Antony's book about his mother. I wondered if you could talk a bit about structuring, the screenplay based on that material, and the choice to kind of condense down to this very specific period in Lee Miller's life.
I would love to very smartly tell you how I made that decision, but I did not. I actually am representing 3 writers right now. So the previous writers who had written a draft of the script, John Colley and Marion Hume, who couldn't be with us here today. The greatest gift that happened was that they chose this period of time. Marion is one of the most incredible writers, researchers, character whisperers that I've ever met. And when I came onto the movie, she was the third call I made. I talked to Kate, I talked to Ellen, and I talked to Marion. I didn't make that choice. Marion and John had decided that the time to spend with Lee was during this era, which, having written other biopics, is truthfully the hardest decision to make. I don't believe in cradle to grave biopics. That doesn't mean they can't be done. They just can't be done by me. I'm not a good enough writer to do it. But I think when you make a biopic, you want to find the most unique period in someone's life that is also the most universal, which is incredibly difficult to find. And not everybody has it. Not everybody everybody wants to make a movie about has that. And Lee did, and they found that, which is this period of time that's shown in the film. And I think the thing for me that was the most unique about it, of finding my place in this film and finding the story, was meeting with Tony. And Ellen and I went to the farm, and we went to the archives and spent time talking to Tony about his mother and about your life and your relationship. And that, I think, really was what opened the film up. Finding the time before someone is a mother is really interesting. Finding the time before someone unexpectedly finds out they're going to be a mother, which I can speak to, is interesting and unique. And it happens to be sort of the most pivotal professional point in her life that she never talked about again. So I don't know. I wish I could tell you that I took credit for it, but I didn't.
When I first read the script in 2018, Kate said, I want to go into production pretty soon. And I said, well, actually, we have to stop because we need to look at the script again. Because what often happens in a story when it's about a certain person is that it feels like it's a series of events. And I said, it would be great. We need to be able to put we need an encapsulated story where there's a beginning, middle, and an end, where you feel like you come full circle. And so when Liz was working on the script, it was really interesting that she was able to bring that structure to it, to be able to bring it to a full circle. And that really, when we read your script at the end, that really, it hit home for us, bringing you back into it, because we had discussed, how do we bring Tony into the project? Remember, it had a very different beginning. So that really brought the film full circle. And I've read other scripts that are about other people, during the course of my career, and I found that that's always been, a singular kind of obstacle, is how do you get the film to come full circle? And, you did that brilliantly.
What was really nice was that you were so receptive to that kind of detail. And it was the same with Marion. And Marion would get in touch with him, and she's questions like, is it possible for two people to walk abreast up the stairs to Hitler's apartment? So I thought, oh, crikey, it's a few years since I was there, so we'd better go back and have a look. So we did go back and have a look, and we went around Dachau concentration camp and all that sort of thing. She was so diligent about that. And then it took you to come along and shorten it up, because Marion's screenplay was so perfectly researched that it was just too much of it. We could have made a 7-part miniseries. But
if anybody's interested, just
yeah. Well, we still could do that. Anyway, the point was that then you came along and shortened it in the most fantastically skillful way. But I think what helped was that both you and Marion were such attention to detail and to fact and to getting it right. And we went to endless lengths to make sure that we were actually telling a true story in the way that we did.
I actually, one of my favorite times, the scariest thing as a writer is when you send the script to the person that you've written a movie about. And Antony was like the most terrifying person for me to send this. You and I have not talked about this. You were the most terrifying person for me to send this draft to. And I don't think I told you that I'd put you in the movie. I don't know that we had that conversation, that the journalist and that arc. And so I send the script off, and I'm waiting, and I'm just like, oh God, he's gonna hate it. I didn't do it right. And he comes back, and the note draft, it's like 1, 2, 3 pages of notes, and the first thing is like 2 lines, and you were like, it's brilliant, it totally works. She would not have drinking vodka that way at this time. And like, that was your response. I was like, great, I love this. But it was perfect, and I think it spoke so well to your affection and attention for your mother and for the history of your family. And I don't know that we say thanks enough.
Well, the thing is that we have the same thing, that the terrifying bit for us is when we show him the movie. And Kate and I showed you the movie, didn't we? And you can talk a bit about that, but it was amazing. And at the end, we all had this big hug and tears. And then I said, after a little chat, I said, have you got any notes? And Tony said, well, when they're shining the spotlights, the plane that goes overhead, you've got a 4-engine plane sound then? Should be 2. I was like, if that's your only note, we're okay.
Seeing the movie for the first time in the company of Kate Winslet and Kate Solomon was actually kind of a cathartic experience, because I'd lived this movie for such a long time and worked on the production and so on. But to see it there and to experience it in this way was really a deeply, deeply moving thing. And we were actually, all of us, in tears at the end. But the thing that absolutely harpooned me was close to the end, one of the sequences with Lee, when she's close to the camera and talking to the camera, there was a moment when suddenly something happened, and I couldn't believe it was a movie. I thought somehow that Lee had come back to life, and she was right there in front of me, talking to me. And that was so, so deeply moving. It really was just wonderful almost to have her back and to make friends with her, because my life with her had been deeply conflicted, but here she was, and suddenly all that was resolved. And it was just a measure of how convincing Kate is in that portrait.
Yeah, it was a brilliant performance by Kate. I mean, she's such a brilliant actor. She was able to, touch upon all of these nuances and be able to portray this person in a way that we were able to connect with her, at the same time really understand what was going on with her emotionally and the damage that she, went through, not only because of the war, but because of her earlier life and childhood. And so we see what the ramifications are of that all through and through. And, Tony, you were a really important and essential part of this film to be able to convey that and to give us that, that sense of history and that sense of background. I know that Kate spent a long time with you talking about, your mother, and as I did too, talking about who she was and, how she would react. And so I thank you for all that you've done, because you've written so many books. You should really check out his book, The Lives of Lee Miller, many books that you've written and put out there with your daughter Amy, and putting exhibitions around Lee Miller's war. It's a fascinating, riveting, portrait of a time, and also of Lee herself.
Thank you.
Thank you guys all so much for being here and for sharing your experiences with the film and for sharing the film. We so appreciate it, and we are
Thank
very
you for
honored.
having us.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.